Millions of dollars stolen.
They took the guard to the back of the garage and stole 26 cash-filled bags from the vault.
Rare art taken in the night.
Two white men dressed as police officers talked their way into the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum and stole 12 priceless works of art.
Treasures gone in just minutes. From the notorious.
More than 20 persons hostage in a Rancho Cordova bank.
To the unsolved. We're taking a look at history-making heists. How did they happen? And could they be pulled off today?
My name is Scott Decker. I'm a retired supervisory special agent of the FBI. I've also written a book recounting the anthrax attacks. My first assignment in the FBI was to the Boston Bank Robbery Task Force. We handled bank and armored car robberies, bank burglaries, and major thefts in the greater Boston metropolitan area.
The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston is over a century old and houses works by some of Europe's greatest artists. But on St. Patrick's Day 1990, it was the site of one of the most notorious art heists in history.
Is there significance to St. Patrick's Day? Why that day for a robbery? We really don't know the significance other than it was likely in an Irish-centric city such as Boston, the robbers thought the police would be tied up handling drunken revelers.
Shortly after midnight on March 18, 1990, two Boston police officers knock on the museum's door. They tell security guards they've received a tip about a disturbance and need to make sure everything's okay. When the guards let them in, the officer's story changes. They announce they're serving an arrest warrant. They handcuff both guards. They then reveal their true purpose. This is a robbery.
I should note we don't believe they were officers in any way. It was a disguise.
No external alarm is activated, and just before leaving, the robbers take something else, the surveillance tape.
The two stole 13 pieces of art, worth a total of $200 million back in '90, making it the largest value of art ever stolen. Today, it's estimated that the 13 items would total $500 million. This was the theft of highest value in art since World War II, and that would also add to their value.
I've worked here for 12 years, so you can imagine these things become old friends. It's shocking. We're very sad.
I feel very dreadful about that. One of my favorite places, huh?
11 were paintings and charcoals. They included paintings by Rembrandt, Manet, and Vermeer.
Among the 13 pieces of art stolen from the Gardner's Dutch Room and Short Gallery, Rembrandt's only seascape, Christ in the Storm on the Sea of Galilee, and one of Vermeer's few paintings, The Concert.
Anyone who knows this collection even casually would know that the Rembrandts and the Vermeer, being the only Vermeer in New England, are very valuable paintings.
Mysteriously, the thieves leave behind paintings far more valuable than those taken, including Titian's masterpiece, The Rape of Europa. In fact, authorities find it odd that none of the museum's lauded Italian Renaissance paintings were touched.
The mystery has always been, to this day, why those? It's anybody's guess, really. A joke, poke us in the eye, they didn't know what they were doing, or they had a couple different collectors in the wings that just had odd tastes, but they left behind some very valuable artwork. Unfortunately, they cut them out of the frames, which I think is a horrible thing to do because it's a piece of history that you're really destroying.
The FBI investigates the case for years, searching for potential suspects. But without surveillance footage or a credible ID, all the FBI could do was speculate about the motive.
Why is the art valuable to the bad guys? The most common thing is to use the information and negotiate a lower prison sentence, even eliminate a current prison sentence. They could hold the artwork for ransom, or they may have a buyer waiting in the wings, somebody that knows somebody, and they happen to have a great need to hang a couple $100 million painting in their house and never let anybody see it. You can't shop this stuff around. It doesn't work. So usually a shady art dealer may broker the deal, and if he has connections in the underworld, professional thieves, really. These have to be professional burglars.
In 2013, the FBI announced they know who stole the paintings. They do not release their identities, revealing only that they're members of a criminal organization and that they can't be brought to justice.
You know who took them. Why can't we solve the case?
The two individuals that took them and committed this crime are currently dead.
Advances in forensic technology would make a heist like this far more challenging to get away with today. But the Gardner works of art have yet to be recovered.
If they knew where they are, they'd go get them. That art is going to be found someday. It's got to. It's going to be found someday. It will.
With the burglars long dead, how could a case like this still be solved?
We have deathbed confessions, possibly finding the stuff in the storage unit after they stop paying the bill, or somebody gets drunk and shoots his mouth off and we hear about it. I should note, though, if anybody watching, there is a $10 million reward. So if you know where they are, you could retire on that.
Our second heist takes us to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where a decade earlier, another pair of criminals identified opportunity in the festive chaos of St. Patrick's Day. On March 19, 1982, thieves slip under a garage door at Purolator Armored Truck Company as an armored truck exits the terminal. The security guard would later tell investigators that two men dressed in trench coats, wearing glasses, and carrying walkie-talkies showed their badges and claimed to be FBI agents. They told the guard that they were acting on a tip that a robbery was about to occur.
Well, they weren't lying, because they then proceeded to rob the terminal of the money.
They handcuffed him and they blindfolded him. They put the glasses on and they put a tape all the way around his head. But he said he could see a little bit underneath the bottom there. And they taped his mouth shut.
Then using walkie-talkies, they called a vehicle from outside that they let drive into the terminal, where they then loaded it with 500 pounds of money. The interesting part is they left behind $55 million in money and securities. That's $156 million today. It's unusual, but it's not unheard of for the robbers and the bad guys to dress up as law enforcement. I know from my experience, they're not all that hard to get. The place where the Boston police had their leather jackets made, they had ones they never sold. They were for sale. If somebody wanted it, you could buy it. The bad guys will steal police cars and they'll just take stuff out of the trunk. Bulletproof vests, extra uniforms. I know a lot of police officers will carry an extra hat or a jacket inside in case they get messed up during the day. And the badges are available too. They're widely used in Hollywood as props. They're not hard to get. It's very easy to dress like an FBI agent. You have to wear one arm and put a tie on. That's all you have to do.
The description by witnesses and the physical evidence at the crime scene are the two most important elements in bank robbery investigations.
In today's world, advances in surveillance and tracking technology would make an armored car robber easy to catch. Decades later, the money still hasn't been recovered.
The money still hasn't been found. It is unusual. Unfortunately, it does happen though. But some of them do go unsolved for decades. And that's just, on the bad guys' part, good discipline. They don't tell anybody outside the immediate gang. They don't tell their wives, their girlfriends. They just are very disciplined. When they're not, that's when they get solved, and that's when they go to jail.
Our third heist takes us just outside Kansas City, Missouri, to the home of the Harry S. Truman Presidential Library and Museum, which recognizes the life and legacy of the 33rd president in his home state. It is also the scene of a shocking and unusual crime. In the early morning of March 24th, 1978, two people pull up to the library and within 45 seconds, manage to break in, smashing a lobby display case and making off with 3 ceremonial swords and 2 daggers.
They had been gifts to President Truman from a king of Saudi Arabia and the Shah of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, who was in power before Ayatollah Khomeini took over.
When the security guard hears the alarm, he races to the lobby, only to find the thieves had chained the inside of the door handles. Collectively, the items were valued between $700,000 and $1 million.
One diamond alone, decorating the swords and daggers, was valued at $200,000. That's a very large diamond, many carats.
The thieves had weather on their side for an even quicker getaway. Whether by luck or by planning, a winter storm can be an advantage to would-be criminals to this day.
There was a snowfall that early morning. That always helps in the getaway process. Robberies frequently will happen during a snowstorm if it's in the winter. And that's because pursuit is difficult. The car of choice for many police departments is a Crown Victoria. They're large, they have a huge trunk, 4 doors for transporting prisoners, but the rear-wheel drive, and they handle horribly in the snow. The bad guys will commonly use a front-wheel drive, usually a minivan, so they can all get in and jump out at once. But they handle much better in the snow.
None of the items have ever been recovered, and no suspects have ever been officially named. The perpetrators most likely rendered the treasures unrecognizable or untraceable.
If they melted these things down and they were gold, so they're easy to melt, they'd simply remove the jewels and sell them, or they could go to a jeweler and have them recut so they couldn't be identified. That's probably the best theory about why this was done. It would obviously destroy the historic value of these things. But a lot of people don't care about history. If you go with our theory of melting them down and reselling the stones, there's nothing really to return or identify, unfortunately. No leads and no viable suspects at all. And there is still a reward, $10,000. So it's an open investigation, really.
Advances in technology would make a heist like this virtually impossible today.
No motion detectors. The outside windows were low to the ground without bars. That would change today. The doors inside the museum had no windows and they were lockable from both sides. So that would be changed today. At least windows would be available, if not crash bars or some way to avoid a chain and a lock. Crash bars, you wouldn't have handles to use.
Not all heists go down so smoothly. In the midst of a recession in 1974, 2 desperate young men make a drastic decision. The pair steal shotguns and a revolver from a gun store in a strip mall, then walk to a Crocker bank in the same mall and attempt to rob it. Coincidentally, a police officer happens to walk in during the process. The young men shoot at him, but miss, setting off an hour-long standoff that captivates the entire city of Sacramento.
Very soon, 100 police officers surrounded the bank, complete with a helicopter overhead. The 2 robbers then held 24 people inside the bank as hostages.
The robbers have a highly unusual request. They want to talk, not just to the police, but to the local news.
At about 5 p.m., word apparently came through that communication that Madigan and Young wanted to talk with a newsman and a cameraman to tell their story to the community. Can I come in? I've got a cameraman with me, so guy behind.
They released 8 hostages in exchange for a deputy sheriff, and then they demanded $1 million in ransom to let the rest go. Late that afternoon, the authorities did deliver the money in cash.
Why did they finally let you go? Why were you one of the people?
Because I was pregnant. Okay. They figured if something happens to the baby, that's murder, and they didn't want to do that, you know. So they took somebody else in my place.
The standoff continues. Local news reporter Bill Harvey and his cameraman record the pair's statements.
I want to tell all these people why I'm doing this. It's because my parents had a bad time in this world, and I've had a bad time in this world. I can't get a job, and I can't do nothing. I was crazy to do this, and I regret doing it, in a sense, but I'm glad that I did it, because I got what I wanted. I wanted to talk to somebody and tell these people about how this establishment gets stuff out of you.
All I want to say now is that I am a little scared right now. And I do regret doing this right now, but the way that my conditions were at home, there was not enough food. I couldn't find a job. I had no transportation, and I don't want to sound like a sob story or anything, but I just want to get this money and I just want to leave. That's all I want to do.
But the most useful device for the identification and apprehension of bank robbers is still the human eye and the human mind.
If it happened today, the local SWAT team would take immediate control. They'll bring in negotiators. The negotiators will come in and they will work in shifts. And they will talk to the robbers over the telephone. In the olden days, so you had like a walkie-talkie telephone, and it had a roll of, I don't know how many hundreds of feet of telephone wire on it. And that would be rolled into the bank. And then the FBI guys would talk on one end, and the robbers would hopefully talk on the other end. Nowadays, it's more sophisticated. They just throw a burner phone in the bank and talk to them that way. But the negotiators work in shifts, and they'll start small, trying to get small confessions, trade food, or give them a pizza if they give us a hostage. It does happen. It sounds trivial, but sometimes the demands are not that complicated.
Shoulder to shoulder they stand, one force against the common enemy, crime.
They would deploy one or two snipers, snipers that were either Marine or Army trained, around or over the bank. And they would zero in on the bad guys when and if they could. The snipers would be under the orders of the incident commander, and the incident commander would be a high-ranking law enforcement official, either local, state, or federal. And the incident commander would coordinate the SWAT team, the snipers, and the negotiators, and try to get a good outcome with nobody being hurt. But it does happen if the hostage takers give the police no choice, the sniper will be given the green light, and their goal is a headshot. And these guys are good at it. They're very accurate, very disciplined.
The local news reporter, along with investigators, continue to try to convince the hostage takers to surrender.
So we kept at it, finally getting them to agree that they would surrender after they saw their statements aired on TV. Is that right? Nobody's going to bother you. Nobody's going to bother you. We'll bring the TV set in here, we'll get going, get on the road. And so the film was rushed to the studio and processed, and it was shortly afterward, following an announcement that the statements would be aired later in the Channel 3 Report's 6:30 program, that Madigan and Young surrendered themselves in a really wild scene of cheering onlookers after deputies promised they could watch themselves on television. And so, luckily, and we feel very proud of the fact that it all ended happily, at least no one was hurt.
A reporter would not be allowed in today. That's a real liability issue. If something happened, we could be guaranteed the family would sue. But that would be a negotiation point for the hostage negotiators to work with, a concession they could get in return for something. It's not common at all for criminals to want media attention. They know it will lead to their immediate or eventual downfall.
One of the most meticulously planned heists of the 20th century plays out like the plot of a Hollywood film. Yes, our final heist is a blockbuster. On January 17, 1950, armored and masked men rob the Brinks Armored Car Company's warehouse. They tie up 5 Brinks employees and then use a passkey to get through the locked doors to the second floor of the warehouse.
As it turned out, 2 of the gang had gotten in prior, temporarily removed the lock cylinders, and made key copies for the locks.
The robbers are dressed identically, in navy pea coats, gloves, Halloween masks, chauffeur hats, and old-fashioned rubbers on their shoes.
They had planned meticulously. They did very little talking and moved deliberately as if things were choreographed. And apparently they had been choreographed. They did leave evidence behind. The rope and tape to tie up the employees, and one of the robbers dropped his chauffeur's hat. The police and the FBI immediately rounded up all the usual suspects in the Boston area. And this is back in the days when the FBI and the Boston police kept index cards. And they would have an index card of all the bad guys in their area. And then they'd have associates noted on the car, who hangs out with who. So they would go to the file, probably didn't need to, the detectives would know these guys personally, and they round them all up, give them the 3rd degree to a certain extent. Nobody said nothing, as they say. Nobody would say a word.
They got away with $1.2 million in cash, plus $1.5 million in checks and money orders. Today, their loot would be worth about $31 million, and they almost got away with it. Almost.
What you can always do if you witness a bank robbery is to observe closely, recall accurately, preserve carefully.
For years, authorities have no concrete suspects, but known criminals like Joseph Specs O'Keefe are brought in for questioning. O'Keefe never confesses. That is until nearly 6 years after the heist. And with only days remaining before the statute of limitations is set to run out for charges to be filed for the crime.
He gave detailed information that the FBI could quickly corroborate, information that never made it into the newspapers for just this reason.
Police are able to arrest the other criminals involved 5 days before their statutes run out. 8 of the 11 involved are convicted after a 9-week trial. 2 die before they could be tried. O'Keefe makes a deal with the FBI in order to avoid prison time. However, only $57,000 of their total fortune is ever found. After all, the elusive 11 had nearly 6 years to spend, bury, or otherwise hide their riches. To this day, it remains a tantalizing mystery.
Frankly, no one thinks you'll pull it off.
Who's no one?
Everyone.
Hollywood took notice of this sensational story. There was 1978's The Brinks Job, starring Warren Oates as Specs O'Keefe. The Ocean's 11 franchise also takes inspiration from the Brinks Heist.
What I would say is the precise planning, the discipline, the amount of money taken, and the fact that the case was solved days before the statute ran out makes it very appealing to Hollywood. Poor guys from Boston, from the tenements, getting away with millions of dollars, and nobody getting hurt.
The preservation of physical evidence, so essential to bank robbery investigations, can be summarized in 3 words. Don't touch anything.
If it happened today, it would be much harder to get away with. I'll use an example as the chauffeur's hat that was dropped in the Brinks robbery. That is today a valuable source of DNA. Back in the 50s, we didn't even know the structure of DNA. The DNA wasn't on the radar of any detective. Many states now collect DNA samples from arrestees for any arrest, and it's put into a national database, just like fingerprints are. You can get a DNA profile out of a single skin cell now. It's so sensitive. So that chauffeur's cap there, coupled with the fact that felons are having their DNA samples collected, pushed into a national database, that could have been solved within a couple of weeks if we were lucky with DNA.
Have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. We find the defendant guilty as charged.
What is our fascination with these historic heists? Why, after all these years, do they still capture our imagination?
I think history is important to learn from. We do learn from it. The public doesn't know what goes on during the investigation, but also the sense of danger, the fact that the Brinks could occur without somebody getting hurt. They got away with it for 6 years and the money still hasn't been found. The Gardner, there's got to be private people out there trying to figure out where the artwork is. You know, it's a $10 million pot at the end of the rainbow there. So it's intriguing. It's a mystery. People like to solve mysteries.